This program is sponsored by Futures Unbounded and is responsible for its content.
Welcome, fellow humans, to the Writing is on the Wall radio broadcast coming to you from WHKW 1220, a Salem radio station. I am TA, the teacher's assistant, and this program is a non-religious, non-spiritual investigation of everything we can discern that was created, recorded, and modeled for us in the Bible. After all, that's why the Bible was written. It was written for us. God didn't write it for himself. He didn't write it for saints. He wrote it for us, the man in the street. Tonight, I'm going to call this broadcast/podcast characterization. And I'm going to explain to you what characterization is, how it works, and why it's important. First, I want to start off with getting on the same page about God. A lot of us think we know who God is, what he does, what he's responsible for, and what we can ignore about God. And that last one's kind of silly, but you'll find an awful lot of people who think that that is true, that they can ignore God. They haven't really read the Bible, though, and they don't understand that their ignoring God will not make him go away. We are in this maturation module that he has given us the opportunity to live in and grow and learn. And whether we make use of that or not is up to us. If we choose to fail by not trying, then we will fail. So, the four things about God that I want to visit with you about to start the program off is, I want you to understand that God does nothing without a purpose. Absolutely nothing. Everything is connected. Everything works. 2, God does not need to avoid reality. God is the foundation of reality. 3, God had Jesus sent to man to inform and exemplify the change in perspective that individual humans needed to make in order to grow up. It's extremely important. I know it's a little long to conceptualize just off of the sound of my voice. I'll repeat it. God had Jesus sent to mankind, if you will, to inform and exemplify the change in perspective that individual humans needed to make in order to grow up. Period. Very important. That's our job. That's what you are ignoring and not doing when you don't study the Bible, when you don't ask, all right, why was this done? The big 3 questions are, who are you? What are you? And why are you here on earth? Those are the 3 questions that you're supposed to think about every day. You are not intended to have a final answer to any one of those, but you are supposed to think about it. You are supposed to search for the answer and not to be satisfied until you get there, which means you won't be satisfied, which is fine, because it's your job to work and to try. It is not your job to sit back and let life come at you and basically breathe and eat and not do anything. That is not your job. And the 4th one is the one that doesn't get said often enough in the Bible. It's Ephesians 5:1. Paul has mentioned it, and that is the reason that God wants you to grow up It's because God loves you and wants you to imitate him. Now, I know well, of course. Yeah, that's why he sent Christ. That's not the only reason he sent Christ, but yes, that is the major reason. Unfortunately, we need a little tutoring, so if Jesus didn't show up, make a statement, and then leave. He had to grow into it and the understanding that he needed. God has a timetable for everything. And we have been given the opportunity to live through our mistakes and to hopefully make improvements and occasionally to get something right, all headed toward the opportunity, the sanctity, if you will, of growing up. Well, that's the hope, at least. That's our job. Whether we do it or not is up to us. So in the characterization that I intend to explain to you, there's an old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And it's true. You can take a look at one picture and understand an awful lot from it. You can impute an awful lot from implied action, but you don't know that you're 100% correct, but you can get an idea of what you think from your perspective might be happening. Well, now it's a lot easier when you see successive pictures, what we call moving pictures or movies, along the same theme and during the same time. You see just a little bit of change, and from picture A to picture B to picture C to keep on going, the change leads you into an area where you have the opportunity to firm up those ideas that you have. This is all practice. This is for us to practice. We are supposed to do this. The reason that Jesus gave us stories and parables was to help us practice. Now, the thing that he spoke to us in, all the parables are in the subjective, because that's all we understood. And unfortunately, that's still true today for most of us. We did not understand the transition that needed to be made from subjective to objective decision making. Now, I can characterize it very clearly and succinctly, and say that objective decision making means that you make the decisions what is best for everyone involved and will move things forward for everyone rather than for yourself alone. Something that would be especially good for you but wouldn't be good for the rest of the community is something you should ignore. And that's making an objective decision. Whereas the way we're raised, hey, it's great for me, too bad if it screws anybody else, that is subjective. And that's the way we're all raised. Each and every one of us start off as babes, and we have issues, and we need to get those issues settled, and so that our focus is on us growing up. Now, occasionally we shift our focus to parents or to someone else, whoever the caregivers are in our lives that can assist us, but that's a secondary thing. We never think of them first, or at least very seldom think of them first, unless it enables us to better serve our own needs. And that's just pretty much a fact of life. And that is completely subjective decision making. So the moving pictures that allow you over time to view a situation that is changing in a method that you can get insight and perspective also develops the character, which is where the term characterization comes from. So if you take 100,000 words and you break it down into a paragraph, maybe a very long paragraph, where you show the beginning, the processes involved, and what you should realize at the end of that time period, then that's a characterization. If it's accurate, then it is easier for people to learn from it as long as they are sure that the source is correct. And that's another issue. But the whole point in me bringing this up is that most of us do not realize, unless we read the Bible for content, very important, because most of us read the Bible in bits and pieces because religious practitioners have said, go to this chapter and this verse of this book and read this and understand that that supports what I say. Tuesday mornings, I have a Bible study at my church, and this past Sunday, our pastor gave his sermon on Deuteronomy 26, which is, I characterize as the first fruits chapter, where God tells them, the Jews, that they are exactly what they're to do and exactly what they're to say when they get into the promised land and they make it their own by growing food there, what they're supposed to do in thankfulness and to show the world that they understand that they did not achieve this on their own, strictly on their own, that they needed to sacrifice certain things in a certain way. And that's great. But, and here's the but, not all of us are farmers. But the one thing we all are is human. Your intelligence, your ability to dig, your desire to understand, you're not being put off by something being too difficult or not being supported by friends or getting in the way of doing something for pleasure for yourself. All of these things that I've just mentioned are an abnegation of the first fruits, which is the first fruits of your intelligence and your drive and your desire also belong to God. Not just the fruit of the land, but the fruit of humanity. And that does not mean sacrificing children on an idol. What that does mean is working to understand the difference between a servant and a friend. I told you last week, I'm pretty sure, about John 15:15, where Jesus has already sent Judas Iscariot out to be the traitor that he was. Even though he justified what he is doing by, well, now Jesus is going to have to rise up and show the world that he's the deliverer. He's going to deliver Israel from the Romans. And of course, that's not what Jesus was sent for. It was an incorrect characterization on not only Judas's part, but all the Jews before him that told one another the same sack of baloney. That's what the Messiah is for. No, that was not what the Messiah for. They were thinking way too small. And subjectively, that's what they wanted. So they assumed, that, of course, that they were correct because they wanted it. And as we all know today, they were wrong. Just wanting something is not enough. So Jesus explained to those left in the upper room shortly before they left, again, Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 15, that he wanted them to follow and be obedient to what he asked them to do, but he didn't just want their obedience. As a slave or a servant would obey because they were afraid of being chastised. No, he wanted their obedience as friends, which didn't mean just, hey, I like you, Jesus, so I'm going to obey you. No. A friend's job is to get to the bottom of why your friend thinks this is so important so that you can support him. Very, very important. And it's something that didn't ever really make it through translation. There were so many wonderful ideas and concepts here that this one just kind of went over everybody's head. It was one of those, oh, well, of course. But we know now that it was one of those things that were so easy to agree with that we never dug into it. And that's the problem. A friend asked me, why was Jesus sent to earth? And I told him very clearly, well, he said why in John 7:24. He came to show them how not to judge by outward appearances, but to judge correctly. Short sentence. Jesus was 100% correct. Nobody got it because, oh, well, of course. They didn't realize, they read John 3 and dug into it, they may have understood that it was not as easy as they thought. Just agreeing to it doesn't work. You have to look at everything that Jesus said and understand, all right, how could he say this? Why would he say this? What's the point? How do you develop an attitude that is this way? And many people, everybody, certainly all religious practitioners, preachers and pastors, will tell you just have to add one or two goody two-shoes kinds of things to the way you are, and you'll be a Christian. Unfortunately, you will only be a letter Christian. That gives you another opportunity, but it doesn't seat you next to Jesus. And that's the thing that we all, if you're a Christian, you should want. You shouldn't want for other people to tell you how good you are. You should want to understand why you're good. And Jesus said, no one's good but God. And the Bible also says, Ephesians 5:1, that it is our job to imitate God. Something else that was kind of lost in translation is one of those, oh, well, of course. So no one ever argues it, no one digs into it, no one tries to understand how just two words could have such a depth of meaning that you basically have got to transition in order to do. But that's the truth of it, and the truth will set you free. And that is that once you are working at trying to imitate God, And you can do that by following Jesus' instructions and directions and the example that he gave us and the life that he modeled for us. And hopefully at this time you realize that's part of my intro. So that you can understand that you need to not put yourself first, but to make decisions based on what's best for everyone. Now, this morning's Bible study was on Ephesians 4. And I'm going to go over part of it because most of the people there this morning didn't get it. I think probably none of them didn't, at least until I brought something up. And I don't know afterwards how important it was to them. But whenever you have a discussion, an argument, however you want to characterize it, you have a point to make. Unless you just like arguing, and there are some people who like to argue just for the sake of arguing. But most people are trying to get to a certain point. This is why I say this. This is why I act this way. So, from Ephesians 4, and this is from starting with verse 11. This is after Paul discusses about him being in hell and ascending to heaven. Jesus, he also gave apostles, prophets, missionaries, as well as pastors and teachers as gifts to his church. Their purpose is to prepare God's people to serve and to build up the body of Christ. This is to continue until all of us are united in our faith and in our knowledge about God's Son, until we become mature, until we measure up to Christ, who is the standard. You cannot get any plainer than that. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. This is what all this was about. Jesus was sent and came to us to tell us what it was like to switch from the subjective decision-making module that we were in to the objective. And we still don't realize it. Most of us don't. I do. I've gone through it all. I figured it out. And if I can figure it out, anybody who works at it hard enough can figure it out. But you have to leave belief systems behind. Put them aside. Don't ignore them. Don't throw them away. You have to not want to believe. You have to want to understand. And that was Jesus' purpose, to get us to understand what the difference is between doing something for yourself and doing it for all mankind as a group. So this is extremely important. This is what this part of Ephesians is about. Before this, Paul said about keeping everyone together. And that's very important also. And no matter how anti-religious you might be, you must appreciate the fact that we were kept involved over the last 2,000 years until the last maybe 40, 50 years. All right, so the break is here already, and I'll have to let go for now. Please come back and we will continue this as I try to explain about the maturation module that God gave us the opportunity to exist, love, and grow in. Talk to you soon.
fake news, racist hats? Are you afraid to believe anymore? Well, let me tell you of one brave soul who, like David, slew Goliath. The true story of one man's fight against greed, corruption, and insatiable ambition in small-town Ohio, Checkmate reveals why passion and integrity are rare in the corridors of swing state politics. If you want to hear the truth, how the swamp operates in Ohio with all the political corruption in real time, get Steve Krause's tell-all true life story, Checkmate, One Man's Fight Against Political Corruption, available on Amazon. As a newly elected state representative, Steve takes you behind the scenes, behind the closed doors, and rips back the curtain to expose all the lies, the deceit, and power-hungry gamesmanship. Checkmate reads like a TV drama, but it's not.
Once you start it, you won't be able to put it down.
Checkmate, One Man's Fight Against Political Corruption by Steve Krause, available on Amazon today. Be afraid. Be very afraid. There are those in Washington who want the IRS to take more of your hard-earned money. Are you tired of being the perpetual cash cow for every scheme, unreasonable program, and for all the fraud, waste, and abuse in our system? Well, good news. I can help. George Satari has almost 40 years of experience helping people like you keep more of what you make. It makes no sense that the more you make, the more they take. Let George help you keep your money away from the government bureaucratic waste and in your pocket. Call 216-651-1120 right now and schedule your free consultation today. Instead of a victim, you'll be the victor. With many success stories, George helps with tax planning, estate planning, financial and business analysis, and more. The new tax law has many ways to save money with retirement planning, accelerated depreciation, up to 20% exception of net earnings, and so much more. Call 216-651-1120. That's 216-651-1120. You earn it, we'll help you keep it. That's George Satari, CPA, 216-651-1120.
Welcome, fellow humans, to the Writing is on the Wall radio broadcast coming to you from WHKW 1220, a Salem radio station. This is the second half of the characterization program, which is being broadcast for the first time on October the 19th, 2021. So I went through characterization and what it was. And I mentioned at the close that we are in a maturation module. Paul was very open about the fact that we are meant to mature until we measure up to Christ, who is the standard. For those of you taking notes, that was Ephesians 4:12 and 13. So that's the point of being a Christian. You're supposed to learn, grow, and love, and help one another, not just your fellow Baptist or Presbyterian or Catholic or whatever, your fellow Christian and your fellow human. Whatever you do as a Christian is for all humanities, including those who would persecute you. Now, it's extremely important to understand that being a human, you are related to every other human, not just physically, certainly not always socially. Your education level may be totally different. Your understanding level may be completely different. But the important part is that you are a part of humanity. You notice that's how I start off every broadcast. It's by welcoming you, fellow humans. And that's because you are always going to be a fellow human. My responsibility is not just for me, but it's for you too. There are a lot of people who give me credit for going the extra mile and trying to witness to everyone on the radio or however else. And that's great, but if I don't get it across to you what it is that the Bible's trying to tell you, then as far as I'm concerned, I failed. Now, it's not up to me to succeed 100%. If you've listened over the last few broadcasts, you understand how upset Solomon got when he finally figured out that he was not going to be in at the close, quote unquote, that he would not have everything explained to him because more time needed to be added to the human experience. We needed to process more. Hopefully, you've read the Bible enough, the New Testament, to know that Jesus was at that point also. But, and here's the big difference, he went to the garden to pray at least twice to ask for more time here on earth because he didn't feel that the people were getting it. But in the end, when he got no reply, in the end, he bowed his head and said, "Thy will be done." Knowing that God's plan had a timing and it wasn't to happen then. More time needed to be. Humans needed to mature more. The reason, the methods that we were given for maturity, did you realize that the 10 Commandments, the foundation of civilization? If you're an American, you probably do, because it was the foundation for our civilization. Without those 10 Commandments, which seem like personal entreaties to act a certain way, to act right, quote unquote. And in others, it's how to act right in a group, so basically split 5 and 5. The important thing was, though, not to act just, but to live that way so that you would be able to learn and grow. Now, if you told them when back in Solomon's day or whatever, or I guess it'd have to be a little after that, but they told them that eventually you would have a civilization that could develop Ezekiel's chariot on their own, they would have laughed. They would have thought you a madman. And yet, it was just last week that Bill Shatner went up into space, and he's 80, 90? I think 90 years old. The thing you need to understand is that we are given the opportunity to learn and grow and mature and to assist our brothers and sisters to do the same by facing reality and putting aside our childish belief systems. Your expectations are part of that childish belief system. Now, if you have a certain expectation towards justice and it doesn't happen, what do? You cry and you moan and you whimper and eventually you just suck it up because you don't have anything else. I mean, unless you can get someone to pay attention to you and give you justice, which is extremely rare. But then you denigrate the justice system by saying it's laws that are manipulated by men. And you'd be correct. Only God is just. Jesus said only God is good, but only God is just. You're hoping he's not so just that he gives you what you deserve, but what you aspire to. And that's why you have the opportunity to learn and grow with the Bible. The Bible is what God gave us as an instruction manual, directions. He gave us examples and models of what to do, and he hopefully piqued our interest enough so that we would try and figure out why. The whole point is for us to imitate God. You think God only does for himself? He doesn't need anything. He's God. He's got everything. So the opportunities that he's provided for us here on earth, he's done out of love. God does nothing without a purpose. God does not need to avoid reality. God is the foundation of reality. God doesn't have belief systems. God doesn't think a particular NASCAR team should win, or that a referee's bad call should be fixed so that the team that was in the lead can stay in the lead, or whatever it happens to be. All these things, all these judgments that we make, we do out of belief. The ref believed he was correct, and he made the call. Turns out, we could look back and see he was wrong. But nothing could be done about it at that point, because you gave him the authority to make the call. And that's what the book of Judges is all about. Now, we are not going to get into the book of Judges tonight, but you should read it. And you should read it for content. And when you get to the portion where it ends a certain segment, a certain judge's life, and it states, and everyone in Israel did as they thought right. Understand that that is our definition. Our definition for dissolution. If everybody does what they think is right, rather than following a system, what do we call that? Entropy? Where everything dissolves? Because nobody can agree on anything? And nobody's heading in the same direction? That's what Paul was referring to in Ephesians 4. You got to keep everyone together, part of the community, so that you can move forward together, involved. And he gave us instructions for that. And a lot of times they were ignored. But they're there in the Bible so that even if one group ignores them, another group can read them and say, you know what? Why don't we try this? Now, it appears that Paul actually understood. He had a lot more knowledge than we have today. which most religious people are not going to have a problem with. They look up to Paul. Paul was a converted prosecutor. He prosecuted Christians. He wanted them killed, stoned. He wanted them removed. They were an embarrassment to Judaism because they thought that these people were being special Jews. And of course, they couldn't allow that because that would mean that they were no longer under the ruling hierarchy's thumb. After Paul's conversion, he argued with James to say, no, these followers of Christ are not Jews that are going off the reservation or Jewish light or whatever you want to call them. These are the self-chosen children of God following Jesus directly without the path through Moses. Which meant basically, leave them alone. You got no right to give these people a hard time. I didn't. I discovered my error, had a little help. I was brought to Jesus. It was his come to Jesus moment, even though they didn't physically meet. It's one of those things that's important to understand that Jesus said you had two opportunities. And that was so that you would all be involved as Christians. The one that most everybody does is believe on my name. And the second, the important one, the one that the apostles, the friends of Jesus, are supposed to adhere to, is do as I do. Now, the only way to do as Jesus does is to switch from subjective decision-making, where you think you may be rewarded for giving a pat on the back or whatever for being a nice guy, to objective decision-making, where you don't even worry about anybody patting you on the back because you're doing the right thing according to Jesus. And God had Jesus sent to earth to show us this way. So you have God's approval to follow Jesus' instructions and directions. And Jesus said, I'm not come to make anything new. I am here to fulfill the old. So, I hope I've been able to understand or to explain to you that this maturation module that you're in has been going on since 4004 BC. That was not the beginning of the world. It may have been the beginning of humanity. Certainly was the beginning of the connectedness of humanity. It was the point at which God, what can we say, anointed man, gave us a purpose, gave us an opportunity to find a solution that would support us, which we call salvation. Now, most people who are religious Christians want salvation to be a spiritual thing. Because 1800 years ago, when they were getting together and saying, all right, what can we agree to in order to be the unified Christian church under Roman authority? All but about 4 of the ministers that met were accepted into the host, but they had to agree to abide by everybody else's. ideas. And they all did, except, of course, for the 4 who were basically cast out. You should read that. There's an article by Christianity Today that is extremely good and well researched, and from what I can tell, very accurate. Unfortunately, the leadership of Christianity Today is not as Christian as I would like. But what was written was pretty accurate. So try and get hold of that and read it if you can. 325 AD, I think it was, the meeting in that little Turkish town. Well, anyway, that's where the Roman emperor came to them and said, if you can get this cobbled together into one single entity, then I will support you. And they did. But that's history. And that's history about us because it showed a part of maturation that we leapt to, wanting to keep everyone together, which is one of the things that Paul exhorted us to do. And that was important, and they have kept us involved. Unfortunately, the point of view has not changed significantly from 1800 years ago. You have to basically channel the ideas that were accepted back in 325 AD in order to be a religious Christian. And most people do that and accept it as part of the Christian walk, quote unquote. But God did not want us to be Christians. He wanted us to follow Jesus and become children of God who imitate their Father and grow up to be someone, a child, that God would be proud of. That's our job. Are we doing it? Not as many as I would like to see. Most don't realize that it's an opportunity or that it's something that we're supposed to be doing. And that's one of the reasons that I have this radio program. Not just to tell you that you should, but to tell you how. Now, I've told you in the past that God, it's in the Bible, that He wants His faith in us to be the foundation of all that we will achieve. And the 4 cornerstones are logic, manipulated by reason, checked by wisdom, and then applied with grace, which is faith and love. So that's the foundation and the 4 cornerstones of the civilization that we were to build using the 10 Commandments, the pillars of our civilization, and we did. But now we've gotten to the point where we assume, oh, well, it was always this way. It's just natural to be honest and natural to be fair and just. But of course it isn't. If it were natural, it wouldn't have had to be written down. These were a model that God gave us in order to assist us in building a civilization, which in turn assisted us to mature. Back in 325 AD, with the point of view that they had then, and that we, for the most part, we've upgraded a few things. They went from a single God to the triune God. That's about it. It's about the only difference. And that assumes that, oops, we only made one mistake. That assumes that there are only three forces that are in the Godhead. And we don't know that. And it is hubris for us to assume or postulate that. That's not in our pay grade. But we do it anyway. At least most people do. I don't. I don't need to. I let God handle his end of things, and I handle mine. And mine is not to get lost in belief systems like religion or religious practice or dogma. None of that stuff. It's also not my job to get lost in fellow feeling to the point where I don't investigate what it is that Jesus wanted us to do in order to line up and become successfully one of God's children, growing towards adulthood. Nope, that's my job. My job is to let everyone know that you can do this, that Jesus paved the way, gave us the example. He was the example, the model. He told us how we would feel if we could make the switch. He told us what we would do if we could make the switch. Most of us thought, well, if we just add these things to what we already are, then we're golden. And that's not what God said. That's not what Jesus said. Again, John 3. It's like being born again. And that's exactly right. All the preconceived notions that you have just seem to fall away when you understand that the only things that count are the things that God instructed Christ to teach us so that we could grow. Well, we're nearing the end of our time for this week, and I hope you understand the characterization aspect that I've tried to get across to you, and that we are in a maturation module that God set up for us and has operated for us. And our desire to be one and live through it and learn and grow is at issue. And the closer we can get towards perfecting that attitude of learning through love and understanding what it is that Jesus wanted us to do, the closer we will get to God. All right, well, I can hear the music in my ears, which means that we are at our time once again. So I want to thank you for tuning in, or if you're listening to the podcast, I hope this was instructional for you, because we have only one way to go, and that is forward. So thank you once again, and talk to you next week. Good night.
This program has been sponsored by George Satari, CPA.